Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. It's episode 299. We've got a great special guest here. We've got Cindy Nicholson, the Course Whisperer, with us. Cindy, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for having me on today. Yes, as Jonathan mentioned, I am the Course Whisperer from thecoursewhisperer.co, where I help entrepreneurs. They create the content for the online courses that they want to create.
All right. And how long have you been doing that, and where are you based, Cindy?
Well, I'm based just outside of Toronto, but I've been developing courses and training for probably over 12 years now. More specifically, helping entrepreneurs with online courses just over a year now. But I started out actually as a high school teacher. I was a high school teacher and a phys ed and math teacher for a few years. Loved teaching, but didn't love the teaching subjects. So got interested in the financial industry and moved over into the financial industry, but missed the teaching. And so I ended up landing a corporate training job where I got to train financial advisors in that were new to the company. And so I loved doing that as well, but then decided to stay home for a couple of years with my kids. And once you get home and get out of the grind of driving downtown all of the time, I decided to go back to school to study nutrition. So I have a varied background. And while I was in nutrition, I discovered this online world and realized that I was in the courses that I was taking. Number one, there was a lot of gaps in the courses that I was taking. And number two, a lot of people that I was doing these online courses with were looking for help from people to help them organize things. Now, so I spent a lot of time doing that and realized that there was a lot of need out there for people that wanted to kind of articulate a message, but didn't know how to craft it in an effective way. So that's how I ended up moving over into this world.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that, Cindy. So it's a major tagline on your website, you are making these 5 online course mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So we delve into maybe what these 5 mistakes are.
Yeah, so as I went, have been taking a number of online courses myself, I kind of see these mistakes kind of over and over again when I get into courses. And, for me, I want to be able to create courses that I want to take. And number one, probably the biggest thing that I see is that these online course creators are just providing too much content. So they want to provide as much value as they can, and they feel the best way to do that is to provide content. So they have these 30-minute or 1-hour videos of training in their courses, and it's just way, way, way too much information. So that's one of the biggest things that I see is the first mistake is really that they're creating too much, they're providing too much content. And really what the objective is, or what you're trying to do is really kind of the second mistake, is there's no real clear outcome for the course. So, often people, if they have a particular skill set, you may want to teach a course in SEO or teach a course in how to create a website. But a lot of the courses aren't designed around having a specific outcome. So what I mean by that is that, they've created all this content of all of these things that they should know, but aren't focusing that content around a specific outcome. What will the learner get by starting at your course and finishing your course? And so I often see that which also lends itself to having too much content, because if you're not super clear on what your outcome is, then you end up throwing in a bunch of information that may not necessarily apply to that particular outcome. Now, so kind of to combine with the whole too much content is the third mistake that I see, which is not enough activities. So often learner or course creators are thinking, well, if I just tell them, they'll learn it. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So often these courses have just a bunch of videos and that's all that's available. And there isn't any type of activity or application exercise. And I'm talking about more than just quizzes. I'm talking about, you know, how can they start to apply what they're learning in the real world? And so, you know, that's kind of the other mistake that I kind of see out there, is that I don't see as many activities included or application exercises after each of the lessons that are being taught. Would you agree with that, Jonathan?
Oh, totally.
And so the fourth thing, you know, when I'm thinking about when people are putting content together, is that they aren't what I like to do is I'd like to have them my clients create some sort of journey, so that when they start here and they go through this step, this step, this step, this step to get to the final journey. And what I like to have my clients provide is to show a visual representation of what that journey is going to look like, so that as they're going through the course, the clients know exactly, you know, I'm in step 1 and this is what I'm going to learn. Now I'm in step 2 and this is what I'm going to learn. It allows the brain to kind of really understand the progression of what they're about to learn. So I don't often see that in online courses. Often I'm showed all of the information I'm going to learn, but not how it all fits together in a nice package. And that's one of the kind of the other mistakes, is I like to see online courses kind of provide like a journey or a visual representation of the overall direction that the course is going to take. And then the last mistake, and you might relate to this one as well, Jonathan, is often people will wait to finish the course before they start doing anything about it from a marketing perspective or, you know, a communication perspective. And they'll be like, okay, well, I'll wait till this is all done and then I will market it and then I will launch it and then I'll do all the other work behind it. And often both of them can be going on at the same time. And so, you know, I encourage my clients that if I'm working on the content for them, that they can kind of continue or start to work on the marketing materials that will help them get people buying it once its course is ready. They can kind of start to build that hype.
Yeah, I totally agree with all your points, but I think your last point is a real biggie because of a couple of factors. Market fit is not easy, even if you're an experienced online digital marketer. You know, what you think your audience should know and what problems that you think you are solving in your course and the great value that you're offering. When you actually start marketing, you find the opposite, that the actual target audience does not feel the same as you about your fantastic course. And that can be a bit of a shock, can't it, Cindy?
Yeah. And that's what I recommend always with my clients, is to take that first step before you start creating anything, is make sure that people are going to buy it. So you need to validate your idea with your audience before you actually start putting anything together. And you can kind of do them at the same time in terms of creating like a beta course or something. And so you create it as you go. But even just validating the idea to make sure that people are going to buy it once you've got it. Again, it's all well and good if you think it's a great idea, but you got to ask your audience to see if that is actually going to be the case.
Yeah, I actually think the kind of language utilized in the startup community is quite relevant to the membership and course building community. You know, they use a term like minimum viable product. That's utilized a lot in the startup community. And I think having a kind of mini course that you could initially sell, and then at some stage when you build up the big course, you could offer it as a bonus, or it could be a free course at some stage, but building a mini course just to test at a very reasonable price, just to test the market fit and also the feedback you're going to get from those initial users. What do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I've said this before. Creating a course is just like creating a small business. Like everything, all of the steps that you go to create a business, you kind of go through those similar steps when you create a course. Is you want to make sure that you have an audience, that there's a need for it, and that you want to start out with creating some sort of, you know, as you say, a minimal viable product in order to be able to test the waters, both to get feedback from your audience, but also to see whether or not you're actually hitting it on the mark, like solving the pain point, the actual pain point that your clients are actually having.
Yeah, because it must be, you've dealt with a lot on the content level, but it must be heart wrenching that when you have people spend a lot of time on content, but they find they're getting people to sign up for the course, but they find that they're going to have to do a major rewrite or a major pivot, really.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's so important to do that legwork up front, because if you get the work, if you get that validation up front, then there's less rework, redesign done at the back end. Because, it does take time to put that content together. So you want to make sure if you're going to be building it, that you're doing it the right way, for sure.
So what do you think, based on your experience, what is a really great starting kind of mini course? What should you be providing in that mini course, the size, and what should be in it?
Well, it depends, but I would, when you go to your audience, find out what an urgent pain point that they have that isn't, solving world hunger. It's how do we get the first win out of what might be a larger journey, but really focusing on an urgent, because you want it to be urgent, otherwise nobody's going to sign up, an urgent pain point that you can solve. So it may just be, 5 videos with activities that could be packaged around just a small, pain point, but that's really what you want the focus to be. Is if you have, if you're teaching someone how to, let's say, create a website, what is the first thing that you can have them do and provide the value, get that solution solved for them, so that if they solve that, they're ready for the next step. That's why if you do a good job at the outset, then they're going to be sold as you go further down the road.
That sounds great. I think we're going to go for a break, folks. But before we go, I want to tell you about one of our great sponsors of the WP-Tonic show, and that's Lifter LMS. Lifter LMS is one of the leading learning management plugins for WordPress that you can get for free. The core plugin is totally free. They have bundles of Premier functionality which you can buy additionally, that will make it even more powerful for your membership learning management system. And they're a great sponsor of the WP-Tonic show. They're offering a 15% discount off all their bundled products, their Premier add-ons. If you use WP-Tonic, all one word, you will get that 15% off. You will find a link on the show notes of this episode and on other show notes with the coupon code WP-Tonic, and you can use that and get 15% and utilize their great plugin. We're going to go for our break, and when we're going to come back, we're going to be delving more with Cindy and course building and just great general advice. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had a good discussion about course building. Been a bit depressive, forgot about all the mistakes, but be cheered. If you follow Cindy's advice, you will get a great course, and just it'll be fantastic. Right, Cindy, like in our pre-show chat, like I was saying, I find that people, and it's linked to what we've been discussing in the first half, people either build the whole course out before they do any kind of marketing or testing, or they want to knock it out really quick, and they think that's going to be the final product, and people are going to give them like thousands of dollars. Have you found that you get kind of a lot of people with one extreme. And how do you handle the reality that you're going to have to break to them, basically?
Yeah, well, creating an online course is very glamorous these days in terms of, create a course and you'll bring in thousands of dollars. And I don't think the understanding of that, the idea that in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to produce something of good quality. So you may get the initial hits in terms of people buying your product, but what you're my assumption is people want to have an enduring product where people will refer and love it and send other people to your course. So I tend to get people who want to build a massive course and want to solve everything within the massive course. And so
world hunger, I call them the world
exactly.
hunger solvers.
So I'm usually pulling them back from having them really more focus. I think that we're moving into an era of just-in-time learning. And what I mean by that is people aren't necessarily going to be taking a course on how to set up an online business, this massive course of how to do it. They're going to be like, okay, I need real help on how to do X. So I want to find a course that will help me solve for X. Excuse me. And so I think there'd be a less tendency for people to buy these massive courses, a lot because some of them have been burned before, because they've invested all of this money and they've gotten into the course and it hasn't given them the result that they're looking for. So I think there's a lot of people who are a bit disenchanted with online courses. And so they may be less apt to forking over the cash. And so I feel like, and maybe it's because it's happened to me that, I've kind of begged off these massive courses and now really looking for courses that are going to solve a particular problem of mine in the shortest period of time possible, which is important. So I'm usually finding the people want to do the big courses and I'm pulling them back and having them more focus on what specific pain point. And then they can maybe build 4 or 5 courses rather than having just one big, large one. And one of my clients right now, she's a functional medicine doctor and she's building a course, and we've actually she wanted to create an all-encompassing, be a practitioner and learn the methodology all in one. And we've actually broken down into 4 different courses that the clients can pick and choose depending on what their need is at the time. Ultimately, they could take all 4, but to have it kind of broken down into smaller courses that solve particular pain points is I think where a lot of the clients are what they're looking for nowadays.
That's great. I think I call it modification, and I actually don't think there's a word. I'm notorious for making my own words up, Cindy. But I think breaking it down into smaller courses, getting that feedback from the users that you are utilizing it, and now in that feedback to modify future courses in the big membership package is a very sensible outlook, really. I think what we also, in the actual industry as a total, dropout is quite a big problem, and I would say it's linked to what you just said. What do you think?
In terms of people not finishing their courses, the courses? Yeah, well, I think there's a number of different reasons why that happens. One, they may have just not taken the appropriate time to set aside to do the course, and life got in the way and they just didn't finish it. Number 2, they got into the course and realized it wasn't solving the particular pain point that they were looking for, so they begged off of it. 3, they realized, okay, there isn't a magic pill. I've actually got to do the work, and so this isn't the solution that...
Terrible, isn't it? You can actually do some work.
Yeah, exactly. And number 4, the quality of the content isn't very good. They just are not getting what they needed from the content itself. And which comes back to that whole being specific on your pain point, being clear on your audience, who your audience is actually going to be taking the course. Because if your audience is too broad, then you're going to have too much content in there that doesn't apply to each specific individual. And, you know, as adult learners with multitude of different distractions, as soon as you start talking about something that doesn't apply to me, I'm out, I'm gone, and I'm not coming back again. So that's why it's really important to have like that specific outcome, but also have a very clear audience as to who's taking the course so that you can keep that information targeted to them.
Yeah, I'll get a good picture here why, you know, having some advice and thinking about this is probably wise, is it? Because even on the course, we're not touching the technology side of it, but just the course marketing, what the course, there's a lot of balls to think about, isn't there, Cindy?
Well, and that's the thing. It's funny because often when I'm talking to people about what I do, they're like, well, I know the content. I don't need somebody to help me with the content. And there's one thing about knowing the content versus teaching the content. And that's really kind of where my expertise comes in, is really like, how do you convey everything that you know in a way that makes sense for your learners? And that's what you want, is you want your learners to absorb the information, but then apply it. And so there's it's an art and a science, but there's little tips and tricks that can help you along the way to make it more effective from that perspective.
I've got a question that's linked to what we just said. Back to the first half of the show, I said that there's a lot of terminology that you can apply from the startup community. Another term that they use is onboarding. Is this a thing that you find that a lot of people don't think about when they're developing their course, what the onboarding? And I'm just going to give the listeners and viewers a quick synopsis of what onboarding means in the startup community, because you might not be aware of the term, folks. Onboarding is you sign up for a SaaS product, a service, and basically there's can be a group of email that's sent to you saying how you're getting on with the onboarding. They can offer a one-to-one on initial onboarding Skype or Zoom call. They can send you to specific resources that have been developed for the person that's starting to utilize that product and service. So it's a kind of to make sure that you keep using the product and you don't stop using it and then cancel your monthly subscription. Is this an important area to consider, Cindy, when it comes to memberships?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, when somebody buys an online course, that is the most motivated that they're going to be to go through the course. So you want to capture that. And so, you know, they sign up for your course, they see your marketing materials and it promises all of these wonderful things. So they sign up and they pay their money and now they need to do the course. And so spending time thinking about what you can do to get them into the course and get them comfortable with how the course is laid out, how the course is structured, why you're teaching what you're teaching. Having that process at the very beginning is super important to allow that motivation to sustain itself. Because they're coming in, they're all excited. If they then get confused or don't know where to go or how the course is laid out, that will quickly drop that motivation level and it will be hard for them to come back into it. So onboarding is such a super important element to, you know, creating that really positive experience right at the outset. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the course.
And when it comes to onboarding, have you got any examples that you've seen or worked with that you think they were doing it in a good way when it comes to a course?
Well, it's interesting. I took a course last year and I'm not sure the technology, maybe you would know if it's available, but when I signed up for a course last year, they must have triggered where I was located, and the email came out, you know, addressed to me and made a couple of comments about, you know, because I live just outside of Toronto, so I'm Canadian, so Tim Hortons is a coffee shop that's very near and dear to our hearts. And so there was commentary about that initial email was actually very personalized to me, even though I'm sure it was just generated somehow. But creating that kind of initial connection with the audience is really good. And then once you get into the course, providing like navigation. So like a welcome, but how do you navigate around this course? And, you know, so where do you go first? Where do you go next? Because they're kind of on their own on the other side of a computer. So giving them as much direction as to what to do is gives them the most peace of mind.
And it has the benefit also of reducing the support tickets that you will get. That's do you find that's another area people forget, is how much support they're going to have to offer their members?
Absolutely. And you know, when often people are thinking online courses are passive income, they're not.
There's nothing passive about it, is there?
Exactly. So, you know, that could be quite discouraging, especially if, you know, the marketing material talks about passive income, create an online course and just see the money roll in. It's if you're wanting to create something of quality that's sustainable, there is definitely some legwork around it. And so there's a lot of things like updates, like customer service, all of those things that are involved in that ongoing process of having a course.
But having some thoughts or thinking about the onboarding side of it can reduce, because normally, unless there's some fundamental problems, it's normally in the first few weeks of somebody joining a course that you're going to get a lot of support tickets, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of the things I tell my clients is anytime they do a video, when they finish the video, be super clear as to what the next step is supposed to be. If it is to download something or print something off or be super, super clear, like hold their hand as they're going through the course so they know exactly what they're supposed to do, because they're in a space that is unfamiliar to them. So you're kind of like the tour guide taking them through it. So just be super clear every time. What is their next step? What should they be doing now?
I think that's great. We're going to wrap it up now, folks, for the podcast part of the show. But Cindy's been gracious to say she'll stay on, which you'll be able to watch on the WP-Tonic website, this bonus content, and on our YouTube channel. Like I say, we're going to wrap it up for the podcast. Cindy, how can people get hold of you and learn more about what you're doing and more about how you can help them with their courses?
Well, Jonathan, if people want to learn more about me, they can visit my website at thecoursewhisperer.co. It's interesting.com just came available this week, so I actually was able to get it because before it was way too expensive, so it was very exciting. Anyway, thecoursewhisperer.co. And then for your listeners, if they are interested in getting some free resources from me, they can go to thecoursewhisperer.co/WP-Tonic. And I've got a course outline guide. I've got a free mini course. We were talking about how important it is to validate. There's a free mini course there on how to validate your course. Or if anyone needs to talk to me, they can reach out to me through that as well. So that's thecoursewhisperer.co/WP-Tonic.
Oh, that's great. We'll make sure that's in the show notes, folks. I'll ask Cindy to send me the link and I'll make sure that's on the top. If you want to get hold of me or WP-Tonic, it's really easy. Go to the WP-Tonic website. We have a load of articles. I've posted 3 articles this month around different issues to help you with your course and learning management system around marketing and other issues. There's a ton of resources, interviews from some of the leading marketers. I interviewed Chris Brogan last week. That will be up on the WP-Tonic. That was a fascinating discussion. And we'll see you next week, where we'll be talking to somebody doing something really interesting, WordPress, course building, or learning management systems. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye. Right, Cindy. I've forgotten question 4, 3 that we agreed on. It's just
you're asking me about the platform.
Well, oh yes, that was an interesting one. Thank you so much. It's getting old age, Cindy. Yeah, so you know at one stage, you either looked at Joomla or WordPress, and I would suggest, or Drupal. I would suggest that WordPress was by far the easiest decision to utilize for your online course. Now the landscape has changed quite a lot. You got Thinkific. There's a half a dozen that I could, in my heart, say go and look at. There's a lot more than that, of kind of fully hosted kind of SaaS platforms for you to choose. But then you still got WordPress, LearnDash, Lifter LMS, WP Courseware. You got the WordPress culture. How do you advise clients about, how they should look at the fully hosted solutions or maybe WordPress? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it comes up all of the time in terms of where should I host my course? And as you say, there's a multitude of different choices these days. So it's almost like you're spoiled for choice, which is the challenge right now. And, number one, it really depends on the client in terms of what platform makes sense, whether or not they go third party or self-hosted. It depends on the type of person that they are, from the perspective of, do they like to get involved in the technology and understand the background, or do they want to have it all done for them? And, because it's a learning, actually both platforms it's a learning curve. You need to learn what the best way, how they both are utilized. One has a bit more of a learning curve than the other, but if it's something simple, like it's a simple course that you're launching, maybe one of the third-party hosted system platforms makes sense. If it is a longer-term strategy of yours, where this is going to be a significant part of your business, this is going to be, your community that you're building, I tend to recommend my clients go to the self-hosted platforms. But it often then just comes down to how do they want to interact with their course in terms of how engaged or involved that they need to be. And sometimes it just really depends on the person. But in general terms, if it's pretty simple or they're just starting out and they don't want the headache of having to figure everything else out, then, the third party. But if it is this long-term strategy that's in their plan, that they're building a community around, I think it makes sense for the self-hosted. So it's a tough question to answer without knowing the individual and the type that they're like. It's funny. I kind of always liken it to if my husband and I were to travel, when we traveled on business, when he would get to a new town, he would always rent a car because he would want to figure out where to go, how to get there on his own. Me, I would rent a cab because I didn't want to have to think about it. I just got in the car and it took me to where I needed to go. And so I almost kind of liken it to that perspective. Is it, if it's somebody you don't want to think about it, you just want to have somebody take it there, then perhaps you are best off with the third party. But if you want to get in there and tinker a bit and learn a bit more about how it works, because the experience is much better, then you've got the self-hosted. So I kind of liken it to that perspective.
I think you've done an excellent job there, actually explaining some of the issues. My own feedback about what you've just said is that WP-Tonic, we're a support company, and we can help you build your course from the ground up, but we also support. And I get this question asked a lot myself, and I think it's really in the stage of journey of every individual, because we will actually help. We don't publicize it that much, only a little bit, but we will help you get set up on one of these hosted solutions if you want some help. But I see it as, if you've just started and you haven't done any marketing and you haven't even proven there's a demand for your course, maybe doing this mini course utilizing one of the hosted solutions might be a good idea, so you can concentrate. But on the other hand, I think the point you made, that even these hosted solutions, there is a sizable learning curve. In some ways, just as much maybe as WordPress. I don't know really. That I would have to think about that. Probably a little bit less. Well, if it isn't, I think you've chosen the wrong hosted solution. I don't know about. I would have to think about that. But there's going to be a learning curve. Hopefully, a little bit less. But maybe. But at some stage, you are building a business. That's why I think some of the terms that come from the startup community are quite useful and do apply. So if I was building a really serious building, would I want to build it on somebody else's platform? Probably not. I would probably want as much control on that brand and that intellectual capital as possible. What do you think? Am I just blabbling, Cindy, or there's any?
No, I agree 100%. And I think that the fact that services like yours exist in terms of providing support, ongoing support, almost tilts the scale a bit more to the self-hosted, just because that's what people are worried about, is like, oh my gosh, how do I handle if this goes wrong or this goes wrong? But if you've got that support in the background, I think it makes that decision almost a bit easier. Without services like yours, it might be a bit more, there might be a bit more argument for the one versus the other.
The other thing I've found based on my experience, and it's totally understandable, is even though the technology seems a bit intimidating, after it, I find a lot of clients, they come to us because they found that they've got too engrossed on the technology side, and all the things we've discussed in this interview, they find that they're dealing with clients, but then having the time to deal with the additional course material, which they're going to have to be adding to their present courses, and also thinking of future courses to keep people signed up, to keep the business growing. that they tend to put that on the back burner, because that's really hard work compared to tinkering with the website, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's helpful to have people. I think it's always good to learn it at the outset, so that you have an understanding of how it all works. But then to hand it off is, I think, really valuable, so that you can turn around and focus on the stuff that's important. But I think that initial learning is important to at least understand how it all works. But then with the idea to hand it off to the experts, so that you can focus on the other business building opportunities.
Yeah. Final question before we wrap it up, Cindy, because obviously you've been very generous with your time. We mentioned it in the podcast part of the show, this, and I think it's deeply deceiving, and it's still out there in quite a few websites and even podcasts, this idea that you'll be able to get this membership site and get this income, and you'd be able to go on a 12-month vacation, and it will just run itself. I find those that are peddling that message, even in 2018, deeply deceiving. And what any comments about that?
Well, I even see you create a course in a weekend or create a course in 30 days. I get discouraged by that, just from the perspective. Well, it will appeal to a certain individual. I think the individuals that we potentially like to work with will see through it, and they'll know that in order to do something of good quality, it takes time, and that you can't just set it and forget it. It's got to have this ongoing nurturing. So I'm more interested in dealing with the type of people that want to create something of quality that will have, these long-term sustainable effects. And, the people who are looking for the quick win, well, there's always going to be those type of people. And, they'll kind of just learn the hard way, I suppose.
It's a bit like dating, isn't it? If you're going to find a quality woman or man, you've got to spend a bit of time finding that individual and then spending a bit of time with them, haven't you?
Well, yeah, you can't set it and forget it, that's for sure.
Needed a divorce court, wasn't it? Thank you, Cindy. We're going to wrap it up now, folks. I'm just going to ask Cindy quickly to, Cindy, how can people, for this bonus content, how can people find out more about you and what your service is, Cindy?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is thecoursewhisperer.co, and just some free materials that are available on my website for your listeners is you can go to thecoursewhisperer.co/WP-Tonic, and I've got a free guide of how to create a course outline. Often people struggle with, where do I start? How do I get all of this stuff I have in my brain organized? So I've got a guide on how to do that. I've also got a mini course on how to validate your online course. So if you have a course idea, I give 3-step process of how to, start creating the course with confidence. And then there's also a link there to reach out to me if you want to chat about how I can help you build a great course.
That sounds great. We're going to wrap it up now, folks. Cindy's been a great joy to interview. She's been up for it. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll see you next week, folks. Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.